Beardo Banjo.
Ever since I picked up a copy of Demon's Souls on a whim, because an article online called it the hardest game ever, I had a week off of work and I thought, why not? I have adored the Souls games and followed FromSoft's works excitedly. The moment I set foot into the world of Demon's Souls, I fell in love with the challenging, mystical, obtuse, lore-filled games that FromSoft have been creating year in, year out. Though it's difficult to pin down exactly which is my favourite. I swing between the original Dark Souls and Bloodborne on any given day, but one thing is for sure, I love them all. And so do a huge amount of gamers looking for a deep, challenging and escapist experience. Thus, from out of this collective love for the FromSoft games, an entire genre was born. The Soulslike genre. Now, some are guilty of throwing this label around a little too carelessly. Any game with a high difficulty spike was all of a sudden being compared to Dark Souls, but there was an unmistakable group of games that started to emerge that were specifically and heavily influenced by the Souls series. Lords of the Fallen, The Surge, Neo, Ashen, Dead Cells, Salt and Sanctuary, Hollow Knight, to name just a few, all wore their Souls influences on their sleeve with varying degrees of success, whilst bringing new twists and styles to the formula that made the original Souls games so popular. Mortal Shell, a brand new Souls-like game developed by Cold Symmetry, exploded onto the scene this year with a reveal that immediately caught the attention of FromSoft fans the world over. Unlike many other Souls-like games who tried to put an aesthetically different spin on the tried and tested Dark Souls formula, Mortal Shell was so immediately intriguing because it really looked like a Dark Souls game. The murky green-brown colour palette, the lumbering knight dodge rolling away from an incoming attack, the informative loading screens, the muddy tombs lined with graves, the mad rush to reclaim your dropped progress after an inevitable death, the grotesque yet intriguing enemies. Surely, this was a Dark Souls game, right? My immediate reaction was one of intrigue, excitement and apprehension. Mortal Shell looked great, but boy oh boy did it look like Dark Souls. Imitation is of course the most sincere form of flattery, but when you take on the appearance and mechanics of one of the biggest franchises in the world, you better hope you're bringing enough newness and uniqueness to the table if you hope to capture an audience. The good news is, Mortal Shell does this by the bucket load. It's easy to see the comparisons to Dark Souls and look no further, but after spending around 4 hours with the recently released beta, I'm pleasantly surprised by the ways in which Mortal Shell sets itself apart from its muse. Immediately, Mortal Shell feels familiar. This familiarity was actually my downfall on my first few attempts to overcome the beta. My cocky attitude and unwillingness to learn how these characters move and react was the cause of my demise time and time again. If you treat the game like it's Dark Souls, then you'll be punished. These characters move with more weight. Every swing of a sword feels drawn out and heavy. Learning the exact timings of each swing and learning to anticipate your enemy's attack patterns feels exceptionally rewarding here. Like all good Souls-like games, when things start to click and make sense, it's a wonderful feeling. I bashed heads with an enemy very early on in the beta, a beast in a cave just to the right of your starting position. For any new player venturing into this experience, this enemy particularly feels like a perfect training exercise. I threw myself at it multiple times until I really started to understand how many attacks I could throw out there before I needed to switch to a defensive stance or roll off to the side. Much of the fight felt like early Dark Souls encounters, something I hadn't truly felt since playing the real Souls games for the first time. In place of the standard shield, your character has the ability to activate a harden technique, which turns your body to stone for a period of time, deflecting any incoming attacks and absorbing any damage. Although quite jarring at first, the more you play, the more you start to experiment with the timing of this unique ability. If you launch into a barrage of attacks but overstep just a little, launching that one extra attack that you really shouldn't have launched, then you can cancel out with a well-timed harden, thus interrupting the enemy's counter and putting the control back into the player's corner. Technically speaking, it serves the same purpose as a shield, but it feels very different, and the ability to harden mid-attack, mid-dodge, mid-anything really makes this defensive technique an extremely versatile and exciting feature. You're also equipped with a parry technique that feels exceptionally rewarding. Learning the timing of a parry in Mortal Shell is quite possibly the most important aspect of surviving this experience. Knowing when to take the risk on a parry over hardening to absorb an attack or simply rolling away is a wonderful kind of ballet. After all, a perfectly timed parry with enough resolve in reserve will reward the player with an opportunity to refill a chunk of their health, so weighing up as and when you can confidently land that parry to put yourself in a better position health-wise feels tactical and exciting for all the right reasons. In the beta at least, we are not equipped with an Estus Flask replacement. Food can be found that slowly regenerates health over a period of time, but as far as a healing tool goes, the only genuine means of getting back a substantial amount of health is to land one of those parry ripostes at the right time, meaning that if the full game has no consistent healing tool, then the parry really will be your very best friend. The enemies in Mortal Shell, the ones in the beta anyway, are a great and varied bunch with different approaches to assaulting the player. Low level mobs can be dominated without much issue, but if you let your guard down they are just as capable of finishing you off as any of the larger or more menacing creatures that lurk in the depths. The design of the enemies feels great so far. It's difficult to tell just how out there and mystical the enemies will become as the game unfolds. Many of the enemies currently on show here take a humanoid form, but there are a couple of standouts. One particularly interesting enemy will pull swords out of his own body to launch them at you from afar, and when they're close to defeat, they'll tear off their own head and launch it at you in a last-ditch attempt to turn the tables. Instead of bonfires to rest and level up at, we have Sister Janessa here, a slow-talking, nonsense-spouting NPC that would fit in perfectly around the bonfire at Firelink Shrine.
Are as friendly as Fulgrim. There won't be any merriment around the bonfire here.
She is the place of refuge, a place to level up, spend skill points, hear some lore, and get that much-needed respite in between intense battles. The beta culminates with a face-off against a lumbering boss creature in a grand room, a hulking humanoid boar-like monstrosity that hits hard whilst icicles fall from the ceiling around you, which can also deal damage upon impact. It was this encounter where the systems at play all clicked for me and the importance of using all the tools in your arsenal became apparent. I personally am certainly guilty in Dark Souls of disregarding the parry mechanic. I figured out early on I didn't really need to learn it. In my countless playthroughs I've always opted to brute force my way through the world's obstacles. Sword and shield in hand, get around the back of an enemy, stay near their arse, chop until they're dead. Here however I felt the necessity to learn the parry. I felt the need to understand the importance of using harden at exactly the right time and recognise when I've launched one attack too many. Now I'm not saying Mortal Shell is a better game than Dark Souls, but I am extremely keen to spend more time in this world because its systems feel extremely deliberate and are definitely built to reward players who learn and embrace them. Once I settled into embracing these things, the boss at the end of the beta fell with ease. Timing the parries felt rewarding, and hardening at just the right time to avoid an incoming onslaught was great. I honestly cannot wait to see what Mortal Shell brings to the table when the full game launches this year. Personally, I'm hoping to see some larger interconnected areas, a whole host of grotesque and surprising enemies, and more ways to switch up and deploy the tight combat and defensive mechanics. If the Souls-like genre feels like it's a little overcrowded these days, please just take the time to pay Mortal Shell some attention. Don't disregard it because it looks a little bit too similar to Dark Souls. Yes, some of the locations are extremely close to what you've seen in Dark Souls. Yes, the loading screens look very, very similar to Dark Souls. This game is quite clearly a love letter to that franchise and a love letter to the games that FromSoft make. But if I'm being honest, this is the first Souls-like game I have played personally that's really got close to replicating that special feeling that FromSoft titles have been giving us for years, and for that reason I'm very excited to see what Mortal Shell can do.